Hey everyone, hope you're all doing well. Today's video is a continuation of last week's video, which I explained how I tune my Rogers Concert Tom kit. And this week I'm going to be explaining how I process that same kit in my DAW. So hope you guys enjoy the video. Okay, so here is my mixer in my DAW. I use Logic Pro 10. And it doesn't matter what DAW you use, Pro Tools, Live, Cubase, whatever it is that you use, it doesn't matter. It's just a tool. And also the plugins that you're using, it doesn't really matter as long as you know how to use them. That's the important thing. You could use even just the stock plugins that you get with your DAW, and you should be able to get a good drum sound. So here I used 6 mics to record the kit for these tracks, and usually I have 10 mics set up to record the kit, and then depending on what drum kit I'm using, what sound I'm going for, sometimes I'll use just 2 mics, 3, 5, 6, 10, it depends. So for this I have 1 kick mic, 2 overheads, a snare, a rack tom mic, and a floor tom mic. So here I'm just gonna play the kit, just the raw tracks with no processing at all. Okay, so that's the kit with no processing, and as you could see, the most processing I do is just on the mix bus here. I just have one plugin on the kick, and here on the snare is just a plugin to reverse the phase, which I'll show you very soon. But for this kit, it depends on the track and the sound I'm going for. Sometimes I will have more processing on individual tracks, but for this it just worked this way. And the way I do it is I just experiment. I bring up plugins, and this is a great way. Just take one plugin and learn what it does, learn how to use it, spend a little bit of time with it, and just try different things, experiment, see what you like, and go in that direction. So don't just copy what I did. You can get some ideas from it, but really experiment. Okay, so now I'll just go over the individual tracks. So the kick, this is what it sounds like on its own. Okay, so here what I'm using is a plugin by Isotope called Ozone 8 Vintage Tape, and it just has a few sliders here that you could use. It has a tape speed that you could use to get different tones like a real tape machine, and I'll just let you hear what it sounds like not activated, and then I'll bring it in. So this is not activated, here's activated. So you hear it adds warmth and fatness to the sound and a little bit more punch. So what I do is I just go to a setting, which is club bass, so it adds a bit of low end, and then I tweak the settings in that. I'll try different tape speeds. Here is input drive, so you could add more input to the signal, and it really adds more saturation and crunch. The same with the bias. You could get different tones of saturation. And here you have low emphasis and high emphasis. So this is just an EQ of low end and high end. So I just play with these as the whole kit is playing. So I'll just show you here, if I put more input drive and more bias, see it starts distorting, and the low end here emphasis,
hear that. So I just play with these till I hear what I like. Okay, so now let's move over to the snare, to the overheads here. So I have the overheads panned, not very wide. That's really a personal preference also. So here's what they sound like. Okay, and here's the snare and what it sounds like by itself. Okay, and then I'll go through the toms later. So another important thing to check for is that everything is in phase and working in the best way that it can. So I'll just explain quickly. There's lots of videos on YouTube that you could check specifically just for phase, but I'll just show you how I do it. So what I do is I just go through each individual mic. I'm the one that recorded these tracks, so I already did this in the recording. But so if you receive tracks from someone else or you're recording tracks, you should really check for phase. So what I do is I go through each individual track and I solo it with the overhead. So I'll just give you an example with the snare. So I'll put the two overheads on. And here on the mix bus, I have a gain plugin. A gain plugin is just a plugin where you could, in Logic, where you could put it in mono or stereo or invert the phase. So here I'm going to put it in mono because it's a lot easier to hear phase when it's in mono, when the mix is in mono. So here I'm going to solo the overheads and the snare. I'll bring the snare mic up so I could hear it. So I have a gain plugin here. For the snare, I did invert the phase because I just found I was getting a little bit more fatness from the tone with the phase inverted. So I'll just play it and take the phase in and out. Okay, now I'll flip the phase. So I don't know if you could hear that. When the phase is not inverted, the snare kind of loses a bit of body and fatness, and it becomes a little thinner and less punchier. It's a very subtle difference, but it makes a big difference in the overall mix of the drums. So a trick that I do is, because for this you really have to use your ears and don't use your eyes. It's easy with computers to mix with our eyes because we see everything. But what I do is I just close my eyes, I play the track, and then I just click this on and off, not looking at it, and then I'll slowly click it on and off to see what sounds better. So that sounds better. So I just leave it there. And then I'll go through other mics. I'll leave the overheads on, I'll do the kick, solo the rack tom, solo the floor tom. Okay, so now let me show you what I did on the mix bus. For the first plugin here is the Ozone, the vintage tape plugin, the same one I used on the kick. And so here I just do the same thing. I just play it and then I try stuff. I move the faders, I try different things and see what sounds better. So here, first I'll bypass it and then I'll bring it in. Okay, so I'll bring it in now. Okay, so you can see a bit more presence, warmth, a little bit wider. And for this, I added a little bit more crunch. I don't know if you could hear when I'm playing it. A little bit of crunch that I added. I love the sound of saturation on drums. It really just gives it dirties up the sound a little bit. Okay, so for the second plugin, I'm using, I really love these Fab Filter plugins, and this is Saturn, and I really use this. It's a plugin called Saturn. I really use this a lot on the drums. So here I've put it on a setting which is called Magic Mastering, and then I play with the controls. So what you have here is a bit of compression. You have different tube sounds or amp sounds that you could work with for saturation. You have here EQ for bass, mid, treble, and presence, and you also have a drive for some saturation. So here I'm gonna first play it bypassed. Okay, now I'm gonna bring it in. So you could hear it just brings a little bit more, a little tiny bit of crunch and a little bit of high end and more presence it adds. So what I do is on each of these plugins, I don't make huge changes. There's small changes in each one, but when you put them all on, it makes a big difference. Okay, so here I have an Ozone 8 vintage compressor, and I really just have a bit of compression. I'll just play it for you. First bypassed. Okay, now I'll take it out. In. Now I'll just let you hear what the compressor is doing. I'll just add more, take the threshold down. See, so it really squashes the sound and just kind of glues the drums together. So here I really have, it's just a little bit of compression, maybe 3 dB of compression at the most. And I just use this to glue together and also to get a tone. It kind of just squashes the drums a little bit and adds a little dirtiness to it. Then here is another plugin that I really love called Satin. It's a vintage tape plugin. And for here, I'm using it mostly for tape delay. So I'll just let you hear what it's doing. First without, then in, out, in, okay, so here it's just a tape delay, and you could just tweak how much you want from mix, the feedback. This is stuff that you have to play with and get to learn with the plugins you're using. So just take one plugin at a time and work with that for a few days and just see what it does. Get to know your plugins. That's the important thing, and experiment. And I also have here the input, so a little bit more saturation. So you see, I'm just adding a little bit of saturation on each plugin, and they're all different tones of saturation, and it adds a really nice tone in the end. So here the last plugin that I'm using is from Fab Filter called Simplon, and I'm just adding some EQ and some saturation. So I'll play it without, and then I'll bring it in. Here I'll bring it in. Out. In. So you see it adds some low end, some high end, and you could tweak it. It's really cool here. I'll just show you. Or you could change where. It's very easy to use. So I just move these around as I like it. And here you could choose different saturation, raw, So again, I want to stress the important thing is to experiment. Just try things and see what it does to the kit. Okay, so now I'll play the tracks with no plugins, and then just to see the difference, I'll add all the plugins. Okay, so now I'll add all the plugins in. So you could hear when all the plugins are activated, it makes a big difference in the drum sound. But when we were listening to each individual plugin, it really didn't, there was very, very subtle changes. So that's what you really have to go for. Subtle changes, and putting them all together creates a nice tone. Okay, so another thing I do is that I make sure that the panning of the toms matches with the panning of the overheads, just because you want the tom mics to be in the same place in the stereo field as the toms that are happening in the overheads, because you want that punch and you don't want toms to be in a different place in the stereo field. So I'll just solo the overheads. So this is how it sounds like. So I just hear where the toms are happening in the panning. Okay, so it's pretty tight, the panning, and then I'll solo the rack tom and floor tom and try to match that exactly where they are in the stereo field. So a little bit less there. So it's about there. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video and you got something out of it. And don't hesitate, if you have any questions, please comment, and I'll be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you guys for watching the video. Hope you guys got something out of it. And stay tuned next week for some more playing videos and video lessons coming up. Take care and see you next time.